الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد مفتاح خزائن رحمتك أما بعد. So first of all, I would like to thank Center for Islamic Knowledge for hosting me on this important topic, and also a special thanks for the host and also the moderator Amir Abu Ghudde, and I believe Amir working on the same topic, and specifically legal maxims, as I read recently. So this topic is a very important topic for many people in the history of Islam, and legal maxims, fiqh, and also hadith. Many literatures written on this topic, secondary and primary sources from multiple languages, including Arabic language, English language, Turkish language, and specifically the languages of Indian subcontinents. So many literature written on this topic, but just I want to highlight some literature considered as secondary sources on Hanafism, and I believe some attended people here may be aware of. So the first one is an article written by Dr. Murtaza Badr on an early response to Shafi'i Isa bin Aban on the prophetic report, and then two works by Nurid Safrir on the history of an Islamic school of law, the early spread of Hanafism, and the second book or the second work, Semi-Hanafis and Hanafis biographical sources. Other works coming from Salman Yunus, Suhail Hanif, and also there are other works focusing on the medieval and late history of Hanafis, coming from Johansson, Talal Azam, Sami Ayyub, Burak, and recently there is a special journal on Hanafism called Hanafi Journal Studies. Its board includes some names mentioned in the secondary sources, like Suhail Hanif and Salman Yunus here. So talking about, as I said, on Hadith and Hanafism is a very complicated topic and cannot be approached from just like one angle. So as I said, many literature written on the topic, secondary and primary sources. When we talk about some primary sources, and these sources specifically written in Arabic and Indian subcontinent languages, so mostly focusing on the two aspects, the hadith aspects or the legal theory aspects. We know that hadith criticism is a topic discussed in maybe two sources. The first one in Kutub Usul al-Hanafiya, in the books of legal theory of Hanafi school, and the other sources mostly in Kutub al-Hadith or Kutub Ilm Mustalah al-Hadith, the Hadith nomenclature or Hadith criticism literature. So however, the second source, we don't have a lot of sources coming from Hanafi school. Mostly, as we can see, the Ilm al-Hadith and Ilm Mustalah al-Hadith coming from mainly from Shafi'i school and Hanbali school, not from Hanafi school. There are very few sources, and maybe specifically the very late source by At-Tahanawi in his introduction to Kitab A'la as-Sunan. But however, the topic is discussed widely in Kutub Usul al-Hanafiya, and we have a very good big chapter under the title Al-Akhbar or As-Sunnah in Kutub Usul al-Hanafiya. So what's the new in this presentation, or why I'm interested in this presentation? A few years ago, I was teaching a course on Fusul fil Usul in one Islamic institution, and a student asked a very important question. So how we can verify all of these usul, all of these foundations and principles we read in kutub al-usul, like al-fusul fil usul, or maybe kashf al-asrar, and other usul manuals, usul Hanafi manuals. How we know that these foundations and principles coming from early sources, from the statements of Abu Hanifa and his disciples, the main disciples like al-Shaybani, Abu Yusuf, and Zufar, and others. So this question is a very important question, because we can see later some fuqaha, some jurists coming from different schools, Shafi'i and Maliki school, claimed a very important statement that all foundations and principles written by Hanafi school in their usuli books, so all of these is just like a late argument just to support their early methodology on hadith. So there's nothing we can see as early methodology or early foundations of hadith criticism in Hanafi sources. So that's why I trace the map and the genealogy of Hanafi school in Kutub al-Tabaqat, in biographical dictionaries and Kutub al-Usul, and then I focus mainly on the early manuals written in the 2nd century, and the most important manual written in that century, Kitab al-Hujja ala Ahl al-Madina, by al-Imam Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, the student of al-Imam Abu Hanifa. And mainly the talk today is focusing on the trajectory, the genealogy, and the evolution of this book, and how we understand the connection between the late foundations of Hanafi school on hadith criticism and the early principles. When I say late, so mostly I'm referring to a main division provided by al-Dhahabi on he said in his book, in the introduction of his book, Kitab Mizan al-I'tidal, the late start with year 300. So before 300, we can describe this period as early period, and then after 300 as a late period. So mutaqaddimun and mutaakhirun. So just maybe to give a background on this map, or the silsila of Hanafi school, as we can see here, we have two drawings. The first one showing the names of Hanafi school in Arabic language, and then we have them in English language. I'm not seeing the chat window. I'm just like seeing there is some, maybe in the end you can ask the questions. Yes, I see right now. Yes, this journal, Hanafi, right? Journal of Hanafi Studies. So as we can see, all of these names are very famous name in the Hanafi school, but the colorful, these one who with colors. So we can trace the main discussion on hadith criticism and the role of legal maxims in the history of Hanafi school, and mainly coming from three important figures. The three students of Abu Hanifa, Zufar, Abu Yusuf, and Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani. But in the second generation, everything coming from Isa bin Aban, the one who is maybe the main narrator of Kitab al-Hujjah by al-Shaybani, and then a student of Isa bin Aban, al-Qadi, or the Qadi al-Qudat, the judge of judges, Abu Khazim Abdul Hamid, and then through his student Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi, and then we have another student, al-Tahawi, and Abu Tahir al-Dabbas. This not just like in black, should be with like a different color. So, however, we have here three important figures, as we will see later. We can see here the climax of legal maxims in Hanafi school, and then everything encapsulated and explained by Abu Bakr al-Jassas in his book Al-Fusul في الأصول. So we have here just a transition between Abu Bakr al-Jassas and Abu Zayd al-Dubusi by Abu Ja'far al-Surushani. So Abu Ja'far did not write anything regarding our topic today on Hadith criticism and legal maxim, but Abu Zayd al-Dubusi is the one who maybe provided the most important text, تأسيس الأصول on Hadith criticism and legal maxims. So again, the main stream or the main thread coming from al-Shaybani, Isa bin Aban, Abu Khazim Abdul Hamid, three figures here, al-Karhi, al-Dabbas, al-Tahawi, and then al-Jassas, and then finally Abu Zayd al-Dubusi. So this another drawing by English. So you can trace here the names. So the same names from the first generation, then the second generation, Ibn Aban, Abu Khazim Abdul Hamid, al-Tahawi, al-Karhi, and al-Dabbas here. I'm sorry. And then al-Jassas, and then al-Dubusi. So to give a background on what's happened on the first centuries, or maybe this like early stage of Hanafi school. So as we know that many Hanafi figures in that early stage used to be judge or maybe judge of judges. So for one complete century, this like from the mid of the second Islamic century to the mid of the third Islamic century, the court and everything related to courtship and this craftship of judgeship controlled by Hanafi school. Abu Yusuf, the main disciple of Abu Hanifa, was a judge of judges, and also we can see many Hanafi figures that time used to be judges. And then when we come to the third Islamic century, in the end of the third Islamic century, so we can see some figures from different schools, Shafi'i school and other schools, maybe entered this craftship and became judge. So Ibn Surayj, the very famous Shafi'i scholar in the third Islamic century, decided to be judge on Shiraz, and when he decided to be judge and accepted this position, his Shafi'i colleague Ibn Khayran said to him, be aware, this business is not the Shafi'i business, it's a Hanafi business, so leave it for them. So, but Ibn Surayj just accepted the position and started working as a judge. And then after Ibn Surayj, we can see many judges from Shafi'i school, and then we can see some names from Maliki school, and then finally we can see some names from Hanbali school. Why that's important? This is very important because when we talk about public space, when we talk about courts, when we talk about this very important place in the Muslim cities, we talk about the role of text and how these texts functioning in the public spaces. So that means in the second Islamic century, Hanafi figures, Hanafi scholars used to be in the front line to provide solutions and answers for very complicated and sophisticated questions in that time. So that means to bring all text and to digest all text and then to provide one coherent, systematic, and consistent solution for any problem. So then many literature written on the Adab al-Qudat and the history of Qudat, the biographical dictionaries of Qudat. So we need to be aware of public space and Hadith criticism in the second and third Islamic century. This is another map, giving more details on the numbers of judges. This based on it's not inclusive. I don't do this as an inclusive studies, coming like the names here coming from Shazarat al-Zahab and some biographical dictionaries, but we can see in the second Islamic century, maybe to the mid of the third Islamic centuries, many names coming from Hanafi schools, and then we can see other scholars coming from Zahiri, Shi'i, Jariri, Mu'tazili here in the third Islamic century, and then we can see other names, and the Hanafi school faded from the scene, and we can see other schools occupy the courts instead of Hanafi school. So for Hanafi being in the public space, as I said, they had to provide a concrete and systematic solutions for many complicated answers. So for that, especially in the second Islamic century, as we will talk later and discuss the book of Al-Hujjah by al-Shaybani, so we can see maybe 5 non-isnad tools used by Hanafi school that time. So all of these non-isnad tools highlighted by al-Jassas in his book Al-Fusul fil Usul, and al-Jassas clearly quoted Ibn Aban, and he said this is the word of Ibn Aban, the statement of Ibn Aban on Hadith criticism. So, however, as we will talk later, and as I mentioned also earlier, Ibn Aban was the main narrator of Kitab al-Hujjah by Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani. So, all students of Usul al-Fiqh and Hadith criticism maybe read that in Al-Fusul fil Usul, and when we reach and when we come to the chapter on Al-Akhbar, the prophetic reports on Kitab Al-Fusul fil Usul, Al-Jassas mentioned that Ibn Aban highlighted 5 tools for Hadith criticism in Hanafi school. The first one, Al-Kitab alladhi la yahtamilu al-ma'ani, the unequivocal Quranic text, and the second one is Sunnah Thabita, so maybe a good translation for this, established Sunnah. And the third tool, Umum al-Balwa, maybe can be translated as public matters, public affairs, or Umum al-Balwa has different context, but maybe it would be better to be understood as public matters. And then the fourth tool is the concept of shādh. And here when we talk about the practice of third generation, and when we see the action contradict the report or the prophetic report. And the fifth non-isnad tool is Mujibat Ahkam al-Uqul, translated as necessary rational conclusions. So all of these we can see in the book of Al-Fusul fil Usul by Al-Jassas. So as I said earlier, the question raised by a student just like made me aware how we can trace all of these tools in the early sources, in the early sources of the second Islamic century, in the statement of Al-Imam Abi Hanifa, and also the statements and the writings of his disciples, specifically Al-Imam Al-Shaybani and Al-Imam Abu Yusuf al-Qadi. So here another chart, just like to study the trajectory of the connection between court canons. So canons can be understood also as legal maxims and usul al-qiyas. I'm going to explain usul al-qiyas later. So everything coming from Abu Hanifa, and here I put maybe some minor information on some of these people, like Abu Hanifa reviews judgment, but everyone after him in the second Islamic century and the third Islamic century accepted to be judge or maybe judge of judges. So Zufar, there is a story discussing his debate on al-Asl. I'll mention that later. Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, maybe the most important figures who provide us a very important text on legal maxims, the coherence of fiqh and the consequences of rulings. And the third figure, Abu Yusuf, used to be judge of judges, and he in one of his important statements he gave us a principle how we approach shādh before al-Imam Shafi'i. As the students of Hadith criticism, they read in Kutub al-Mustalah the definition of shādh by Imam Shafi'i, narrated by his student Yunus bin Abdul A'la, that a shādh, that hadith contradict other ahadith, and the hadith shādh is coming from a reliable narrator, but this reliable narrator contradict other narrators, or maybe a more reliable narrator. So for Abu Yusuf, a shādh is wider than the concept of an Imam Shafi'i. So for Abu Yusuf, the hadith that contradict Qur'an or Sunnah, or maybe amal al-sadr al-awwal, the practice of the first generation. So we come to the second generation. Isa bin Aban used also to be judge, and the word tahkim al-usul, arbitration of usul, this a technical term used by al-Jassas, citing Ibn Aban. So we can see with Ibn Aban there is a very huge refutation literature. He transmitted Kitab al-Hujjah and also wrote some books with the title al-Hujjaj, where he debate with al-Imam al-Shafi'i and other figures in his time. And we go to the third generation, the student of Ibn Aban, Abu Khazim Abdul Hamid. He wrote Adab al-Qadi and also used to be judge of judges. And then we go to the following generation, three figures here. Al-Tahawi in his book Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar mainly, and al-Karkhi in his book Usul al-Karkhi. So al-Karkhi in the Hanafi biographical dictionary described as the head of the Hanafi school, and he is the one who giving preference for Qur'an and Sunnah over Hadith. Al-Tahawi in his book Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar, the one we can see this type of criticism, isnad and matan criticism, and a very important source for all of these people who are focusing on isnad and matan criticism. And also Al-Tahawi wrote a treatise in which he refuted Ibn Aban, rebutted Ibn Aban statements. So the books of Ibn Aban and the book of Al-Tahawi on the refutation of Ibn Aban lost, and we don't have access to them. The third figure here, I did not put here, Abu Tahir al-Dabbas. This figure is very important in terms of collecting 17 legal maxims. So Abu Tahir al-Dabbas attempted to digest the Hanafi school and understood the most important legal maxims in the fiqh of Hanafi school, and encapsulated all of these legal maxims in 17 legal maxims. And it seems from these 17 legal maxims we can see later how the genre of Ashbah wa Nazair and the genre of al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya established later. So the following generation, we know that al-Jassas is a very important scholar, and maybe with al-Jassas we can see this trend in Hanafi school to refuse judgment, and al-Jassas used in his book Tahkim al-Usul. Al-Usul here, when I say al-Usul, is not referring to Usul al-Fiqh, referring to a generic term including legal maxims and other principles related to Hadith criticism. So al-Jassas mentioned this word, Tahkim al-Usul, and how we need to rely on Usul when we come to Hadith criticism. And as I said, Abu Ja'far al-Usushani, we don't have something like anything important from him, but when we go to Abu Zayd al-Dubusi in his book, Ta'sis al-Nazar, and where he highlighted the idea of usul al-qiyas. So al-Dubusi explained two technical terms. The first one, usul al-qiyas, and the second one, al-qiyas ala al-usul. So al-qiyas ala al-usul is the normal, the usual legal analogy we know in Kutub al-Usul, but usul al-qiyas is a very specific Hanafi technical term, means the legal maxims and maybe the umbrella or maybe the universal canon that judge and control and tell which hadith is sound or maybe not sound, and which hadith should be reliable or not reliable. So when we talk about asl evolution, so again we have Abu Hanifa, just like specifically on asl evolution, just like to repeat what I mentioned before. So we have Zufar, al-Shaybani, and Abu Yusuf, and then we have Isa bin Aban, Hujjah narrators, and then we have Abu Khazim. We have then three narrators, al-Tahawi, al-Karkhi, Abu Tahir al-Dabbas. Al-Tahawi highlighted a very important technical term, al-Nazar. Al-Karkhi mentioned in his book al-Usul 39 asl, and Abu Tahir al-Dabbas 17 asl. So just going back to al-Tahawi, al-Nazar, this is not a theological technical term we know in Kutub Ilm al-Kalam. Is not about al-Nazar and al-Taqlid. So al-Nazar here, as understood by al-Shaykh Muḥammad Zahid al-Kawthari, he gave an equivalent technical term, al-Asl al-Jami', that means the universal canon that criticize and tells which hadith should be reliable and which hadith should be used or not used, or maybe applied or not applied. So al-Jassas, with al-Jassas we can see the word al-Asl very clear in his book al-Fusul fil Usul, and this Asl here not referring to al-Usul al-Fiqh, referring to the legal maxim. And then Abu Zayd al-Dubusi, Usul al-Qiyas, al-Nazar or al-Nadha'ir. So I put here al-Nazar or al-Nadha'ir. There is a Turkish scholar working right now on the manuscripts of al-Dubusi, and he found that just like we need to wait that his finding that al-Dubusi wrote another book, Ta'sis al-Nadha'ir, not Ta'sis al-Nazar. So however, and also he claims that Ta'sis al-Nadha'ir written by a different figure, not al-Dubusi. But the finding is very important because another mostly working on the same technical term by al-Tahawi, but al-Nadha'ir, we know this like another genre emerged later, al-Ashbah wal-Nadha'ir, later maybe in the 7th Islamic century and so on. So then we can trace the concept of al-Nadha'ir earlier in the Dubusi work, or maybe the another figure that maybe wrote Ta'sis al-Nadha'ir. So here is an incident, a story on the concept of al-Asl happened between al-Kufa and al-Basra. In this story, we have three figures. The first one, Yusuf bin Khalid al-Samti, and the second one, al-Imam Zufar. and then the faqih of Basra, Uthman al-Batti. So Yusuf bin Khalid al-Samti is an Hanafi scholar, a student of Abu Hanifa, described in Hadith biographical dictionaries as a weak narrator, but he used to be one of the disciples of Abu Hanifa in his circle. Zufar, as we know, he is a very famous figure in the second Islamic century, and also was known for his intellectual capacity and his skills in legal analogy. We know Uthman al-Batti used to be the head of a fiqh circle in Basra. So this story, maybe it would be good to read in Arabic and then just like to give a summary in English. I will start with the isnad. حدثنا أبي قال حدثنا أبي قال حدثني أحمد بن محمد بن سلامة قال حدثني أبو خازم القاضي قال سمعت أحمد بن عبدة يقول قدم يوسف بن خالد السمتي البصرة من عند أبي حنيفة فكان يأتي عثمان البتي وهو رئيسها وفقيهها فيجاذب أصحابه المسائل ويذكر لهم خلاف أبي حنيفة إياهم فيضربونه ويسبون أبا حنيفة فلم يزالوا كذلك حتى قدم زفر بن الهذيل البصرة فكان أعلم بالسياسة منه فكان يأتي حلقة البتي فيستمع مسائلهم فإذا وقف so this a mistake not وقف على الأصل الذي بنوا عليه تتبع فروعهم التي فرعوا على ذلك الأصل فإذا وقف and here correct وقف على تركهم الأصل طالب البتي حتى يلزمه قوله ويبين له خروجه عن أصله فيعود أصحابه شهودا عليه بذلك فإذا وقف أصحاب البت على ذلك استحسنوا ما كان منه قال لهم ففي هذا الباب أحسن من هذا الأصل ويذكره لهم ويقيم الحجة عليهم فيه ويأتيهم بالدلائل عليه ويطالب البت بالرجوع إليه ويشهد أصحابه عليه بذلك قال لهم هذا قول أبي حنيفة فما مضت الأيام حتى تحولت الحلقة إلى زفر وبقي البتي وحده. This book, this incident coming from Ibn Abi al-Awwam in his book Fada'il Abi Hanifa, a manual written, as we can see, Ibn al-Awwam died 335, very early source, and we can know that maybe many manuals focusing on the history of Hanafi school, taking this story from Ibn Abi al-Awwam. And this was the isnad of Ibn Abi al-Awwam coming from al-Tahawi and then Abu Khazim al-Qadi, and we can see a connected isnad here. So Yusuf bin Khalid al-Samti used to go to this circle of Uthman al-Batti in al-Basra and just engage in debates with them and just highlight the significance of Hanafi school. But then it turns against him, and the circle of Uthman Batti kick him out and curse Abu Hanifa. And then Yusuf bin Khalid al-Samti mentioned that to his colleague Zufar bin al-Huzay, and here in the text describes Zufar as أعلم بالسياسة منه, that like more knowledgeable how to deal with people, how to handle these maybe complicated situations. A siyasa here is not like policy, how to handle maybe situations and deal with this complicated situations. So Zufar came to the circle of al-Batti and just was silent and listening to them and trying to understand what the legal maxim, what the canon, what the principle, the foundation that this halaqa and this circle building their furu', their masail on. So just like to try to see what the harmony, the balance, the harmony between the principles, the foundations, and their masail. And then once al-Zufar catch or maybe recognize the asl, the foundation, he started to talk with the halaqa and said, okay, but the asl here is different from your furu', and you need to rely on your asl. And this furu' is not maybe just like contradicting your asl. And he doing this game with the halaqa and trying to just to show them how their furu' is not consistent with their usul and not systematic. And when they are like, just like they found themselves in dilemma, asking him, okay, so what's your suggestion? What's your solution? And Zufar said, okay, I have a different asl we can rely on, and then you can see the harmony between the asl and your furu'. And they asked him, what's your asl? And then he mentioned the asl. And after showing that multiple times, they asking him, okay, so from where you studied that? And he said that I studied that in Abi Hanifa circle. And it seems that the end, we don't know, this like coming from Hanafi school, the ending saying that there is a drama that this the whole halaqa, or maybe the majority of halaqa, just left al-Batti and became Hanafi, converted to Hanafi school. Here another story by al-Ala'i in his book Majmū' al-Muzahhab fi Qawaid al-Madhhab on the Abu Tahir al-Dabbas. This is a generation of al-Tahawi and al-Karhi. I read that in Arabic on the history of the 17 legal maxims. حكى القاضي أبو سعد الهروي أن بعض أئمة الحنفية بهرات بلغه أن الإمام أبا طاهر الدباس إمام الحنفية بما وراء النهر رد جميع مذهب أبي حنيفة رحمه الله إلى 17 قاعدة، فسافر إليه وكان أبو طاهر ضريرا، وكان يكرر كل ليلة تلك القواعد بمسجده بعد أن يخرج الناس منه. فالتف الهروي بحصيرة وخرج الناس وأغلق أبو طاهر المسجد، وسرد من تلك القواعد 7 فحصلت للهروي سعلة، فأحس به أبو طاهر فضربه وأخرجه من المسجد، ثم لم يكررها فيه بعد ذلك، فرجع الهروي إلى أصحابه آيسا وتلا عليهم تلك السبع. So it seems like this a very hard working by Abu Tahir al-Dabbas, and maybe the climax of his work on Hanafi school, trying to collect maybe the most important universal legal maxims that all Hanafi schools rely on. And Abu Tahir al-Dabbas every night after Salat al-Isha reviewing all of these 17 qaida, 17 asl. But one of the people in his village just like was aware about this maybe process, or aware of this review, and he just like sneaked inside the mosque and rubbed himself with a rag and just like trying to steal these 17 qaida from Abu Tahir al-Dabbas. In other biographical dictionaries, the one who sneaked in the mosque described as Shafi'i school. So, but here al-Ala'i as Shafi'i, he just like said al-Harawi. So we for this incident we have different maybe descriptions, or maybe specifically for that one who is sneaking inside the mosque. So, however, the 17 qaida in the finally after maybe multiple process reached to al-Qadi Hussein, a very famous Shafi'i Qadi, and then based and relying on these qawaid, he attempted to encapsulate Shafi'i school in 4 qawaid. And it seems like for al-Ala'i and those scholars who are writing on the history of qawaid, it seems like qawaid is starting from this incident, and then al-Qadi Hussein putting 4 qawaid, and then we can see the genre of al-qawaid, as we can see here also from al-Ala'i, that Al-Izz bin Abd al-Salam, the first one who اخترع القواعد، كتاب القواعد الذي اخترعه شيخ الإسلام، not اخترع القواعد، كتاب القواعد الذي اخترعه شيخ الإسلام، وهو الكتاب الذي لا نظير له في بابه. So it is a very unique kitab, and then we can see different books after that. So however, that telling us that Hanafi school in early time did not write on qawaid, and their qawaid and their legal maxims spread in their furu' and not in their usul. That's maybe explain why Hanafi school in medieval time, in the classical time after the 3rd Islamic century, maybe did not write on that because their qawaid spread in their furu'. So like just like to go outside the school and to see like from an external reviewer, when we read in Ibn Rushd Bidayat al-Mujtahid, in this book we can see a very important description by Ibn Rushd when he like is saying وَهُمْ أَحْفَظُ لِلْأَصْلِ. So that means Hanafi school, there is like a consistent and systematic understanding of their furu' and how they connect between their usul and their furu'. So we can see that in Kitab Bidayat Mujtahid maybe multiple times, just like in Kitab al-Tayammum, and he described how Hanafi school more aware of their asl, and you can see the systematic and consistent and coherent connection between the asl and fara'. So finally, maybe the last stage in this presentation, I'm just like focusing on Kitab al-Hujjah by Imam Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, the book published in the second half of the 20th century. And the book needs working. I'm working on this book. I consider this book the second muwatta of Imam Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, the first muwatta narrated from Imam Malik بروايته, and the second muwatta Kitab al-Hujjah. So many ahadith cited in Kitab al-Hujjah, mirroring and describing or maybe giving more reference and understanding for his main muwatta. In this Kitab al-Hujjah, I will not talk about the authority, but the trajectory of Kitab al-Hujjah al-Shaybani, as we know, the one who wrote the book, and then Ibn Aban, the main narrator of the book, and al-Jassas, the collector. So al-Jassas theorized and quoting the statement of Ibn Aban in his book al-Fusul fil Usul. So as we know that the writings of Ibn Aban are lost and we don't have any access for them, so then we have theoretical statements by al-Jassas, but we don't know exactly if these theoretical statements coming from Ibn Aban or maybe from al-Shaybani. That's why we need to study Kitab al-Hujjah to just to reach or maybe to decide are these principles and maybe non-isnad tools and the Hadith criticism coming from the late scholars or coming from the early stage. So another isnad, another silsila, we can see al-Shaybani and then Ibn Aban, as I mentioned earlier, al-Tahawi, al-Jassas, al-Dabusi. I added here al-Tahawi because al-Tahawi is very important. We cannot understand al-Jassas without al-Tahawi. Specifically when we go to read in furu'. And I mean here the Kitab Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar and Kitab Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi by al-Jassas. So in these two books, we can see the application and the implementation of legal maxims and Hadith criticism. And maybe we can see how the asl can be shifted from al-Shaybani to Tahawi to al-Jassas. So we can see with al-Shaybani statements, mostly there are some usuls in Kitab al-Hujjah, but maybe described as non-polished legal maxims. And then al-Tahawi working on these usul, working on these maxims and trying to polishing them and maybe clarifying them. With al-Jassas, we can see maybe the final polished usul in his book Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi. With al-Dabusi, this book Ta'sis Nazar, a very important book telling us how giving a very brief summary how we understand Hanafi schools and the difference between Hanafi schools and Hanafi school and other schools. So again, Ibn Aban, Shaybani disciples, and the teacher of Abu Khazim, the judge of judges, and also al-Khazim, Abu Khazim, who is the teacher of al-Karhi, al-Tahawi, and al-Dabbas. This is a very like silsilat al-Dhahab in Hanafi school. So when we talk about silsilat al-Dhahab in Hanafi school, that means the Hadith criticism and legal maxims. So in Kitab al-Hujjah, we can see around 20 tools encapsulated in 5 tools I mentioned earlier when I talk al-Kitab الذي لا يحتمل المعاني السنة الثابتة and the concept of shādh, عموم البلوى. But all of these 5 non-isnād tools decoded in Kitab al-Hujjah with 20 tools. This is my investigation on Kitab al-Hujjah. I found all of these 5 tools just like decoded in 20 tools in Kitab al-Hujjah. And just like one of them like focusing on legal canons. Okay, so just I will not mention examples for these tools, but just like going over these tools briefly, reading with you. So the first one, verifying the authenticity of hadith through its common link. Madar, the authority of the Prophet's companions over their successors. A systematic and coherent body of hadith, consequences of legal opinions, the number of narrators, prioritizing narrators based upon their region, expertise, or connection with the narrated content, the practice of Islam's first generation, عمل الصدر الأول, diachronic reading of evidences, giving preference to the Qur'an over hadith, considering a case nature based upon gender, region, and limitations, عموم البلوى, and then the role of lay people, al-amma, in the societal cases, specific and general canons, reasoning, al-aql, the authority of the al-hadith al-mursal based upon the reliability of narrators such as Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, the authority of successor reports, al-maqtu', the classification of the third generation's opinions in terms of their legal expertise, sources, regions, or circles. Well-known hadith, mashhur, well-known reports, athar al-marfu', established sunnah, classifications of women narrations based upon their relation to the content. So again, so all of these 20 tools encapsulated in 5 non-isnād tools written by Al-Jassas and collected from Ibn Aban. Again, these 5 tools is Al-Kitab الذي لا يحتمل المعاني, unequivocal Quranic text, As-Sunnah al-Thabita, established Sunnah, عموم البلوى, public matters, Al-Shuzuz, concept, practice of the first generation, and finally, موجبات أحكام al-Aql, necessary rational conclusion. So here, another chart telling us, just like showing us some Hanafi figures from the early period, starting from Abu Hanifa and end with Abu Zayd al-Dabusi, and the tools that used to for Hadith criticism. So we can see the 3rd line, and then the 5th line, and then before the last, all of these agree on the 5 non-isnad tools. Qur'an, established Sunnah, عموم البلوى, موجبات أحكام العقل, and the concept of shādh. For al-Asl al-Jami', as I said, this universal canon test for Hadith criticism, we can see it with Abu Hanifa, and some statement like coming from biographical dictionaries, and we can see it with Abu Zufar, from Zufar, as we see the incident in with Uthman al-Batti, and with Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani. This Asl Jami' should be coherent and also showing the consequences of some scenarios, what I called consequential fiqh al-ma'alat. And then Isa bin Aban تحكيم الأصول, this like coming from al-Jassas describing Ibn Aban methodology. الطحاوي الأصل الجامع, this is a technical term preferred by Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari. The technical term used by al-Tahawi is another. And then Usul al-Qiyas by Abu Zayd al-Dabbusi and al-Jassas, of course, the main maybe figure who highlighted the importance of al-Asl. So we read in Al-Fusul fil Usul two important statements on Ibn Aban perspectives, and these statements are written in Arabic here. So the people who can read Arabic, they can read here, and maybe I will translate, showing the translation in the following slide. But let us read in Arabic. So the first principle for the contradiction between the Khabar al-Rawi, the prophetic report, and the Usul al-Qiyas. So as I said, Usul al-Qiyas is not just like legal analogy here. Usul al-Qiyas is the principles or maybe legal canons, legal maxims. So the first statement is إذا عارض خبر الراوي العدل غير الفقيه. I mean here Abu Huraira مثلا أصول القياس وانسد باب التأويل وكان الخبر يؤسس لحظر ما ثبت إباحته بالأصول أو إيجاب أو إباحة ما ثبت حظره بالأصول فالخبر حينئذ مردود. يؤكد الجصاص أن مذهب ابن أبان هو مذهب أصحاب أبي حنيفة وعليه تدل أصولهم. The second statement يرد خبر الواحد الوارد في إنشاء حظر أو إباحة في حال معارضته للقرآن الذي لا يحتمل المعاني أو السنة الثابتة أو موجبات أحكام العقل أو كان خبرا خاصا يتعلق بأمر عام ولا تعرفه العامة عموم البلوى أو كان شاذا رواه الناس وعملوا بخلافه. So the translation of these two statements, the first one, when a report narrated by a non-legal expert narrator, such as the Prophet's companions Abu Huraira or Anas bin Malik, contradicts legal canons, usul al-qiyas, and there is no way to reconcile the two in sadda babu ta'wil, then the report should be rejected. The second statement, the solitary hadith report, khabar al-wahid, is to be rejected if it contradicts one of the following three sources: unequivocal Quranic text, established Sunnah, necessary rational conclusions, or if the solitary report is specific, khas, and pertains to public matters, but the public is not aware of it, or the report is anomalous, shādh, meaning it's narrated by transmitters who do not act according to it. So here are some legal maxims I found in Kitab al-Hujjah and maybe other early books. One of the universal canons examples, لا يترك اليقين بالظن. This is a preserved canon in the history of legal maxims. Substantives canons, ليس في الأصول بقاء حكم البدل مع الأصل. This mentioned by al-Jassas, a polished canon from Kitab al-Hujjah. The third one, أن يتم الرجل ما لا يجب عليه أحب من أن يقصر فيما يجب فيه التمام. This replaced, we can see it in al-Hujjah, but then replaced with al-Tahawi and al-Jassas. Maybe replaced with different wordings. لا يكون الوطء مجانا أبدا كل شيء لا بأس بالانتفاع. So when I mention all of these legal canons, so mostly mentioned in the book of Kitab al-Hujjah as an umbrella, as a universal foundation to maybe to give us a way or a direction how we can read multiple ahadith in the same mas'ala. So just a list of many examples here, just like I'm reading that in Arabic, no need for translation to English. كل شيء لا بأس بالانتفاع به فلا بأس ببيعه كل فرقة جاءت من قبل النساء فليست بطلاق ما كان ميراث قط حتى يكون قبله صداق. Governance canons العرف لا بأس به ما لم يحل حراما أو يحرم حلالا. So, however, the development of asl or legal maxims, legal canons in Kitab al-Hujjah, we can see some canons preserved in al-Tahawi, al-Jassas, and later we can see that in Kutub al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya and Kutub al-Ashbah wal-Nadha'ir. Some of these canons polished, some of these canons replaced, and some of these canons removed. I believe this is maybe the last slide. So talking about, just like to give a summary on the collective universal canons, what I called al-Asl al-Jami'. I prefer this, and I found the technical term used by al-Imam Muhammad al-Kawthari is a very telling and explicit technical term to explain the Hanafi way and the Hanafi approach on Hadith criticism. So when we talk about Shaybani, the canon should be systematic, coherent, and with what I call consequential fiqh al-intizam or fiqh al-ma'alat. And then collective universal canon, al-Asl al-Jami', al-Kawthari terms for the Tahawi's interpretive method, al-Nazar. So then al-Nazar by al-Tahawi is understood as another al-Asl al-Jami' by Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthar. And then al-Jassas fi al-Usul, arbitration of universal legal canons or foundations, tahkim al-Usul, this word used by al-Jassas, and then in Ta'sis al-Nazar by Abu Zayd al-Dubbusi, talking about the difference between usul al-qiyas and al-qiyas al-usul. And again, usul al-qiyas should be understood as legal canons. And later developed genre, as we can see later, al-ashbah wal-nadha'ir, textual canons, al-qawa'id al-shar'iyya, or legal canons, al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya. All of these coming, I claim, and maybe some people maybe debate, argue, coming from early studies of Hanafi school in their Furu' book. And I think that's all for today, and I believe that's explain my approach on Hadith criticism and the role of legal maxims in early Hanafi work. Many things should maybe to be said here. As I said, many things here may be written and maybe discussed by other scholars. So the new thing here is just like I want to highlight early sources and the 20 non-isnād tools used by al-Imam al-Shaybani as a way maybe to give a way for Hadith criticism, and this not foundations written later just to justify the Hadith criticism or maybe the Hanafi fiqh in early time. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.